Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. We are very pleased to have with us one of our distinguished speakers and our URB visiting scholar, Dr. Shafiq Islam. He's a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and professor of water diplomacy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and director of the Water Diplomacy Program. Dr. Islam research and practice focus on availability, access, and allocation of water within the context of climate change, health, and diplomacy. He seeks interdisciplinary approaches to create actionable knowledge by blending science, engineering, policy, and politics in contextually relevant ways using complex science, systems thinking, and negotiation theory. Dr. Islam maintains a diverse network of national and international partnerships and is engaged in several national and international consulting and training practices all over the world in the United States, Middle East, South Asia, and Africa. He is also the 2016 recipient of the Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz International Water Prize for Creativity. Dr. Islam will be giving 3 sessions at FAFS starting today and over the coming 2 days. Today and on Friday he will be giving lectures, and tomorrow he will be the keynote speaker in a panel session along with other guest speakers from inside the UB and outside UB. In his first session today, Dr. Islam will be talking about engineering diplomacy, which is the pragmatic approach that we need when neither the certainty of scientific solution nor the consensus of what to do exists. So this talk will show how to identify and implement solutions given the context, constraints, and capacity of the system. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Islam.
So thank you very much for a wonderful introduction. But before I start, I also want to thank AUB and FAPS for inviting me. This has been a wonderful last few hours. At least 36 hours. I met some wonderful faculty and was quite intrigued and impressed by the diversity of knowledge base that exists. So what I wanted to do really is want to summarize some of the things we have been thinking and doing for last almost 20 years. So this is, we'll go fast, and I'm sure there will be too many questions and too many unanswered questions, but I think we'll have opportunity to discuss. So I'll try to keep it maybe within about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll have about another half an hour to have some questions. So before I do that, I think I don't like to lecture too much because that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years as a professor. So professors talk too much, and that's what my daughters also complain, that basically just talk too much. So I'll try to make it a little bit more interactive. So to start with, really, so what you see really, that's the title. But if I ask you a really very simple question, how many colors are there? How many colors are there?
Where
on the title? 3. Yeah, very good. So 3, 4.
if you include water diplomacy.
Oh, brilliant. So I should basically exclude that. I think it's only the title. So the title of the talk has 3 colors. So I want you to remember these 3 colors, and I will have this quiz really as we go along. So to start with these 3 colors, and then of course we talk about all kinds of things. So seems like this may not work. So I will use regular one. Let's see what. It is come. Okay. All right. So yeah, so you can see engineering, and so this is all we'll do. So to give you a background, really, I did basically grow up as an engineer. So my undergraduate years was in engineering. Then I have all kinds of other things that happened. So now I have joint appointment both in the School of Engineering and as well as a School of Law and Diplomacy. So that's the reason I started with engineering. And then diplomacy. Diplomacy, the way, and in few minutes it will get clear, it's not a diplomacy that you think when head of the states are doing this. So foreign minister of one country talks about foreign minister of another country. That's one level of diplomacy. Here we'll talk about different kinds of diplomacy, and in few slides probably that will get clearer. And then we put a word called principled, and you'll get to see really what that means. And pragmatic, governed, complex problems. So you have all kinds of things here. So how many colors are there? 7. Okay, good.
7.
So there are basically, I start with 3 and then I make 7. And then I say, okay, fine. And then I blew it up and then I say all kinds of things are happening here. And this will have some other meaning later on. So I want you to remember these 2 numbers, 3 and 7, and I will ask this question what it means. And it has to do with something to do with the complexity, something to do with color, and so on, and nothing to do with diplomacy. But it has to do with the way we think about these problems and why these problems become complex. So if you really bring it down, really, so what essentially I'll try to do, there is a reframing needed. And what does that reframing mean? What does this complexity mean? We'll talk about this. So if you talk about this, so if you are in the engineering camp, you are there, we have this indicator that measures how much water you need. So these are the engineering type that, look, I think, tell me how much, I know exactly how much you need, maybe 100 liters per person per day if you're in the US, maybe 20 if you're in Africa, and so on. So how much water do you need? So that is an engineering measurements. So this is a fact. Then the mother and the child comes and says, look, let me tell you a story about how much water we have. So this is what I think is the fundamental problem really between water and water resource. So what does that mean? So in one camp you have these numbers, in another camp you have these narratives. So this fundamental conflict between numbers and narratives are perennial. So if you are in the School of Engineering, you are talking about numbers. You are in arts and sciences, you talk about stories. Then let me tell you a story. And it's not the number, not the story. I would say that you need probably both. So that's why I said it's not an either or problem. If you think about water, water is essentially hydrogen plus oxygen makes water. So it's a number problem. That I can actually tell you exactly what hydrogen and oxygen combines and becomes water. That's water. When water becomes a resource, it's very different. What does that mean? What that means really is resource is that, okay, now who has more right to this water? Do I want to use this water for irrigation or for fishing or for urban development or for drinking? These are all competing uses of same water. But water itself really is an object. And that object has really no particular feelings. But a water resource really on the other hand has some feelings. Because do I really want to use water for urban development versus do I want to use water for hydropower development or for irrigation or for drinking? These are all conflicting uses. So in that sense, what you really need, what has been happening really is this either or problem. I do this or I do that. And I am claiming that no, I think this is really not the problem. And the gap between these two is also very large. So what we need really is an and problem. So I need to somehow combine this water as an object and water as a resource. And those numbers and the narratives, how that can be combined, this is essentially the fundamental idea of water diplomacy. So what engineering diplomacy really is, if you want to go to the fundamentals, science is objective, more or less. Objective meaning that we can measure things, we can sense it, we can quantify it. So in that sense, science is objective. Policy and decision making, on the other hand, is very subjective. Because it really depends really who is making the policy, whose interest is being served, which politician is in power, and so on. So this is really a subjective judgment where I am using science as an objective measure. And now I come into this really, so mathematics is not physics, we understand. Physics is not political science. Fairly straightforward statement. And mathematics, physics, and political science are not psychology. But all these are considered to be science. So how could that be then? Is mathematics is the same level of science as physics is, or physics is like political science, or political science is psychology? These are all claimed to be science. So this is where I think now I want to stop and bring back the 3 and 7 business. So where did the 3 and 7 come? So 3, if you look at the fundamental of color, there are only 3 colors. What are those? RGB, exactly. So RGB. So how come I have 7 colors in the rainbows? They're mixed.
Physics.
Physics? No.
Different proportions.
Different proportions. So, but if I say that there are fundamentally three colors, now rainbow we have been told, at least for last 400-500 years, that it has 7 colors. Where did it come from? It really came from Newton. So Newton was a religious man. He looked at rainbow and he thought there are 7 colors. Because there are all kinds of 7 references in all kinds of basically revealed religion, from Bible to the Quran and everything else in between. There are this particular word, but number has a very particular meaning. So from there really 7 came. But that's not the point. Now if you really take this RGB and if you go to your computer, really if you have 8-bit chip, it is essentially about 16 million colors. So I can create 16 million colors very distinct from 3, just with 8-bit. With 16-bit is unbelievable how many you can get. So why is that important? The reason it is important really now, what you see really from a very simple 3-level decomposition of a particular problem, which is RGB, I can create 16 million of them. So now if you think about really, see, if I want to make a decision about a particular problem, that problem really only has 3 dimensions. It can really have 16 million type of interpretations too. So what does that mean? What it means really then is essentially this problem space is extremely undefined. So now if I ask the question, is there a problem of water in Lebanon? Yes. So then you say yes, and then I say, what is the problem coming from? You may have some interpretation. If I ask someone else, they will have another interpretation, and we have many of these interpretations, even objectively so. So in RGB, when I can create 16 million of this interpretation, in real life, when human beings are involved, it could be even much more. So in that situation, really no objectivity will work. Just because I have changed a particular palette of color, I can get a different color than what you got, and it may be slightly different. So what that essentially means that the interpretation of really facts which are objective coming from 3 different colors, creating 16 million colors could create serious problem for us. And that's where the decision making becomes extremely problematic. Ultimately, I cannot use even science really objectively to create decision making which seems to be objective, but at the end it is not really. So if that is not the case, then what do we do? So engineering diplomacy really is a mixture of this. It's subjective and objective. Unless we understand that part, it's not going to work. So the problem we have when we are basically putting our engineering hat, we want to be objective, we want to be neutral. We simply cannot. The way I design the experiment has already been biased by the way I think about that problem, by the way I have been trained, or by the way I want to promote certain things. There is nothing wrong in there, but we need to acknowledge that this is not going to be objective. There is no objectivity really. When I say that, look, I tell my students that whether I feel sad or happy, water usually flows downhill. There's laws of gravity. However, water can also flow uphill to money. We have created Los Angeles, a city that cannot be created unless we brought in water by pumping and by other means. So water can also flow uphill, and that has nothing to do with physics. So that has to do with the way the society values their water. Yes, I need to develop this particular area where there is no water, but I have to do this. And we have done it in Saudi Arabia really. We wanted to grow wheat, and we have done it. We have exported wheat, and now we found out that it was not a very good idea. So we have abandoned this. So this is really not that always the natural resource will follow the natural laws. Human laws could really overpower them, and sometimes it could be quite problematic. So given that really, so let me see if I can try to bring it into some type of context. See how do I combine this subjectivity and objectivity. So I can claim that I love blue. You can see again I'm wearing blue. So fine, why it matters? It doesn't matter. Why does it matter really what I love? Then I say no. It has been shown that blue is soothing to your eyes for presentation skills, and this is an objective fact. People have done all kinds of studies, and they have found out that if you're in a room, this is small, but if in a larger room, if you put a blue slide, is soothing to eyes, and people can see it from further away. That's an objective fact. First one is really very subjective. Whether I love blue or purple, it should not matter. However, when I said that no, it has been shown that blue is soothing for presentation slides, it has some objectivity in it. But this is empirical observations. Then I say we agreed that blue should be used in our presentation slides. So this is what we need. What I think is not really important, and what it is also not fully important, but what we think are important is that, look, we as a group can decide, like anybody from AUB making any presentation from now on should use blue. Why? Because blue is soothing to your eyes. Not that I like blue or the dean likes blue, but then I have some objectivity here. This is the way the decision making has to be made. So meaning that I need to somehow combine it with we, not with I. When we start using I, it becomes really dictatorial. That I told you this is blue is the best one, you should use it, and no other justification needed. So that is not the way a sustainable decision making can be made. So unless you can combine it and we, so to bring it that I love, but we love it. I love is not very important. We love it. When we can do this, then you have a good way to make the decisions which are conflicting. So to bring it to now a little bit into the science aspect of the problem, so I really view almost any problem in the world in very simple ways. So there are three types of problems. There is a simple problem, there are complicated problems, and there are complex problems. So and I can challenge you to say, look, I think find out another one that doesn't fit in here. And it doesn't. I think I couldn't find anyone. We have been doing it for almost 10 years, and we asked this, look, is there a problem that is outside these three categories? So what are those three categories? Simple one is that cause-effect relationships are exactly understood, meaning that I can go and switch that light off, it goes off. So how does that happen? It happens here in Beirut, it happens in Bangladesh, it happens in Brazil, because we have understood exactly how electricity works. So cause-effect relationships are exactly known, physics is known, very good. So these are simple problems, and simple problems has very good elegant solutions. So simple problems have very good physics-based engineering solutions. There is no problem, we have done it. Complicated problems are the ones which things are a little bit more complicated. Cause effects are known but not fully known. So an example would be sending someone to the moon. It's a complicated problem, but we have done it. Complicated problem will be to getting the water from a reservoir to a third floor of a building or an 18th floor of a building, and in the morning I am taking a warm shower. Done. How did you do this? Because we have created pipes, we have created pumps, putting heating devices in there, so we can take a shower. No problem. That's a complicated problem, and we have done that. Sending someone to the moon is another example of a complicated problem. Done. Complex problem is the one where cause-effect relationships are not well understood. So what would that be? So that would be like if you build a dam, you displace 3 villages. So do we have a right now to displace villagers who have been living there for the last 100 years just because I want to build hydropower dam to do something? So that means their things are no longer really objective, it's no longer scientific. It is based on really what you are trying to promote. Now why are you building the dam? I want to finance the army. Could be an objective, or I want to essentially subsidize education. These are very different objectives. What objective do I choose and how do I do this? That makes the problem very complex. So that complex problem really does not have any scientific solution. So the first two are easier problem to deal with, simple and complicated. Third one is more difficult. So if you want to make it a little bit more complicated also, so you can put a little bit more nuance into this idea. So simple one would be the things are known. These are exactly known, these are the best practices I can do. I can go anywhere in the world, I can put in electricity, no problem. Knowable one is the one which is complicated problem. Complex one is the one that we are in most of the trouble. So this is where most of the water problems right now reside, in the complex. Chaos is the one that is probably very small fraction of the problem. Suddenly, let's say that I hope it doesn't happen, if there is an earthquake right now here. So we will not really think about really whether it's simple, complicated, we will run out of the building because I need to survive. So these are the places where you are essentially responding to something which is catastrophic. So that's a small set of the problem. There are not too many problems which falls into that domain. Most of the problems, I argue, that basically which are not easily solvable falls into this domain of what we are calling this complex domain. So the cause effect are only coherent in retrospect. I can only know once things have happened. So it's not known really now. So it's always your past eyesight is 20/20 because we can understand really what happened in the past. But retrospective understanding is not good enough really. Can I make prospective understanding? Can I really make predictions? Because that's the whole idea of science and engineering. So what makes these problems complex? So I'll try to give the example really from water. What I'm claiming that would like make very simple, that there are 3 domains of knowledge. The first domain is this natural domain where I have water quality, water quantity and ecosystems. Other domain I have governance, I have assets, I have norms and values. So these are the 6 variables I have, and then these are happening in a politically real world. So natural domain is the people who are in like engineering, science, chemistry, biology. Societal domain is the people in the economics, sociology, psychology, these are the group. So these groups have independently developed a lot of things really in water domain, but when the decision making is done, these are done really in a politically real world. When that happens, really what is going on then is there will be all kinds of problems. So there will be political boundaries, there will be knowledge boundaries, there will be know-how problems. So meaning that who decides really how much water for whom is no longer a very simple decision. So this decision really will depend on all kinds of choices that people have to make. So as a result, really science is no longer the king or the queen, because science is no longer really providing me the solution that I want. Science cannot tell me really who has more right to water. Is it really fish or the farmer? That is not a scientific judgment to be made. But at the same time, when I am using water, I need to make the judgment. So these choices are particularly complex because they involve both uncertainty and multiplicity of values. So if you tell me really, see, is water really in the Ganges is probably one of the most polluted water in the world, but it is very holy to Hindus. So who am I to tell really whether that water is dirty? So these are the type of questions that simply cannot be resolved by science. If that doesn't happen really, then what do we do? So what we argue that essentially if I want to bring it down to something simpler so that I can understand that easily, so there are essentially 4 things that we need to worry about. So variables and processes, these are in the natural domain. You can think about rainfall is a variable, flooding is a process, actors and institutions, meaning that who are the people who are being affected, institution means whether you have a Ministry of Water, Ministry of Fisheries and so on. So I have 4 types of things that we need to worry about. Then we have values, interests and tools. And this is also very important. Values meaning that what type of values do I want to promote? Do I want to promote sustainability? Why is that important? Or do I want to promote equity? Interest is different than values. Interest means you say I want to build a dam to produce certain amount of money so that I can build another nuclear power plant or another missile. That's a particular type of interest I have to do certain things. Tools are the one that most of the engineers and scientists are doing. You develop tools, you develop dams, you develop a rocket. So these are the tools. So oftentimes what happens really, we focus more on the tools without understanding what is motivating that interest or what are the fundamental values that drive the values to do particular tool. Once you have that, then you get into this idea of problems, policies and politics. So what will that mean? Then we will come in a second. So now what we have been told and taught over last about 100 years that ultimately you should be able to find some type of optimal solutions. So I can write down these things in a particular objective function and I can optimize this. What I am claiming that this is really an impossible task. The reason it is impossible really, and I gave you 3 examples of those 3 RGB. From this 3 RGB I can create 16 million colors. So essentially if you want to make the analogy a little bit stretching, then essentially you may have 16 million objective functions. And from there to really search and find an optimal solution is essentially an illusion. There will never be an optimal solution that you can find in a problem that is complex. In a problem that is more simple, of course we have. If you ask me right now, for example, flushing a toilet, we have optimized it because it used to take about 3 gallons per flush. Right now you can get flushing toilets for less than a gallon. So So, that is an optimization problem, can be done with engineering wise, no problem. But now, how to allocate water between competing needs is not an optimal solution problem. It has nothing to do with optimality. It has to do with the really type of values that you want to promote. So, that is where the fundamental problem comes in. That engineers, what we are trying to optimize this, we want everything to be written in objective functions. And everything cannot be written simply in objective functions, may not be even quantifiable by economic metrics. The example that I was giving about the Ganges is the dirtiest water, but it's holy. So, the price is not the question here. So, these are the types of things that we need to worry about really when we are trying to make those decision making for water related problems. So, what does that mean? So, essentially the way science has developed over say last 300 years is that this is the whole idea of this positivism, meaning that I know exactly x and then y, meaning that there is a cause effect relationships. So, if you really go back very fundamental, what you see really science is based on this idea of cause and effect. Any science, say from physics to chemistry to biology, everything what we are trying to see, is there a cause and there an effect, and if it is there, then we can write down an equation, we are all set. And that is the way physics has done remarkably well. So, I can tell you now, for example, 100 years from now, today is 9th or 8th? 8th. So, today is 8th of January 2020, 100 years from now I can tell you exactly what the sun will be. How did you do this? This is the remarkable things we have done really from our understanding of how this orbital path works for different planets. But if I tell you really, will it rain 1 week from now at AUB? You cannot do it with any degree of certainty. So, how come? And the physics is known, physics of rainfall is known, physics of this planetary rotation is also known. One thing I can predict about 100 years, another one I cannot even predict one week. That is what the fundamental problem of physics is. We have assumed that most of these problems are predictable indefinitely, and we are finding out again and again it is not. Why is it not then? That is where essentially the physics fails, that physics problems are understood and predictable only for the simple type of problems. If you have simple type of problems, then it can be done. Then came this other group, they will not really care about this physics. These are normative values, that I believe in this. I believe that everybody should have access to water, because water is a human right. It has nothing to do with science. So, why did that come? That came because these are essentially some global values that we want to promote. We want to say that it has to be sustainable. Why it has to be sustainable? There is no scientific rationale for it. This is something that as a society you have decided that we want to create a sustainable world. Why? There is no rationality here. So, this is a judgment that you are making, this is an opinion, it could be morally based, it could be religiously based, or it could be just totally secular. And I can say that, look, I really do not care, by the time I will be not here, by 2050 there will be climate change and we will have serious problem. I may not be here, I am already dead. Why do I care? I can make that argument. Nathan, you have to care about your grandchildren. What if I don't? So, these are not really scientifically defensible arguments. These essentially coming from these subjective judgments. And those judgments we can decide as a society that this is what we want. You have to look at this as SDG, Sustainability Development Goals. Why suddenly everybody decided to do this? That as a global population we decided that it is important really not only for us, also for our next generation. But most of us will not be here when these things will become real. It will become real. The way we are basically messing up the world, it will become real, but we may not be here. So, is that important? So, those questions I simply cannot answer, but those are the way decisions are being made. Then you have empirical observations. So, you have certain facts and figures, this happens, so this happens. So, there is no theory, but we have seen certain things enough. So, there is an empirical, we can talk about this. And these are the way essentially science has progressed for last about 300 years. And we are saying that I do not think this will work. The reason it will not work really, these are all mixed up. Whether I should particularly emphasize one value versus the other is not really that clean. It cannot be agreed upon by the people just because unless I am a dictator I can decide that okay fine, this is what it is. This is the way it will run. Or then you have to do a democracy. So democracy is also not really very good, but at the same time we do not have anything better than this. So what does that mean? So democracy is an idea. So and then how do you basically implement this? That okay, everybody should have equal votes. Fine. That's only one way to think about it. But if you now go to the US, that doesn't work, because Trump would not have been elected if we were just counting votes. Hillary got 2 million more votes than Trump did. Still, Trump is the president. Why did that happen? Because we have another thing called electoral college. That's another level of complication within the democratic system. And that's the rule of the game. So that rule of the game, the country decided 200 years ago, that's the way it will be done. So that's the name of the game. So just because I have democracy, just because I have a good system, doesn't mean that it will always work really the way we think about it. So there is a serious problem here in terms of really what is real, what is fact, what is feelings, and what is conflict, and so on. And it's not that basically it was rigged. The election was not rigged. Election was perfectly legally done, but the rules were such that majority doesn't win. So that is one way to think about really how democracy can function. So I brought from democracy to voting to electoral college, and you see this still is a mess. And that's the problem. So I tell really to my students, look, the thinnest book I have on my shelf is the US Constitution. It's very thin. We have 9 Supreme Court judges there and probably about several thousand volumes just for taxes. Forget about immigration. Just to interpret what tax means, we have several hundred basically volumes and 9 Supreme Court judges. So that's the story. These are symbolic texts. These texts need to be interpreted. And how do you interpret this is not really a simple thing to do. That is where basically this idea of principal pragmatism comes in. So that means you have to be pragmatic. You have to be pragmatic in the sense that you want to do certain things. But pragmatic doesn't mean that you can do anything you want. It has to be also based on certain principles. So what are those principles is the discussion that we have to have. So this is what basically we have developed for last several years. I will not go into the details of this. So this is what we are saying, that when you have this multiplicity of values, really there will be a lot of interaction effects. So ultimately there is no solutions. Really. The solutions are contingent and also depends on the context. So just to give you one idea, so looking at water, so we are saying the water is a flexible resource. It's a significant twisting of the, when we say water is a flexible resource, what it means really, water is no longer fixed. The water that I use today really for taking a shower, tomorrow you can use it for growing tomatoes. If I don't have enough water, I can use desal. So there are many ways I can create water. So that is what that water becomes a flexible resource, and we can talk about this, and you can probably have a look at this also. So what does pragmatism mean then? Pragmatism essentially what we try to say that is, I want to make a particular solution that is relevant to the problem that I am working with the capacity and the constant that I have. So I cannot just arbitrarily decide solutions. See, I cannot just suddenly say that, look, everybody in Bangladesh will become educated overnight. It will not happen. That's not a pragmatic solution. Given that their literacy rate is at 30%, what can I do? So that is a pragmatic solution. Then you need to also worry about really what are those principal pragmatism. What type of principle do I have to use? So for water, we are saying that there are only 2. I want to only use this idea of sustainability and equity. These are the 2 guiding principles that I want to use for any decision that I want to make with water. Now you say, okay, what is sustainability? What is equity? Let's define this. I said, no, I'm not going to define this. Sustainability for Beirut could be quite different than for Dhaka or for Boston. So that has to be decided by the people or the system that is being affected by that particular problem of sustainability. So I cannot use the sustainability measure that is applicable for Boston and suddenly that it will apply for Boston, Bangladesh also. So those definition also has to be contextually defined. And same with equity. Once you have that, then we say that then you come with negotiated solution. So the solution that I want to promote really for a particular problem will be, and you see really I put something in the parenthesis, resolution. There is no solution to complex problems. Complex problems will never have solutions. It can only be resolved in a particular way. One way to think about this would be that when you have diabetes right now, you don't have a cure. but you know how to manage this diabetes. So that means this is a particular way to resolve that particular problem given the current state of knowledge that we have. On the other hand, if I break my leg, it can be fixed. That problem can be solved because then it can be, you can use surgery or whatever and you fix your leg. So leg injury is quite different than diabetes is. So most of the complex problems really fall into this diabetes regime. These are not simple or complicated problems, these are complex problems. So that brings us to essentially the heart of the issue. Really then we need to define a particular problem. What is the problem that I am interested in? What type of proposal I have for solving that problem, and then what is the politics around that problem. All three are extremely important to create a policy, and what type of policy do you want to do. So then essentially this is in social science literature is called that there has to be policy window. Somehow these three things has to converge. It's not either or, you cannot have one, two, any two. All three has to be aligned properly. If all three are not aligned, no matter how hard you try, it's not going to work. So what it means really, these three streams have their own dynamics. I can find out a problem, I can sit down at AUB or at Tufts and solve it very elegantly. And I have the technical solution, is perfectly done. And you can publish it, no problem. It will never be implemented unless I get the solutions to be also politically feasible. So then what it means really, the probability of rising on the agenda is increased if all three streams are aligned. If they are not aligned properly, you may do anything you want. And we have been frustrated many, many times. How come people do not get it? I have the solution. Of course you do. Politicians are not interested. It's simply not interested. So that is exactly what is going on here really. Then even partial coupling between two will not work. You may get problem and proposal right, it may not work. You may get proposal on the politics side, but you have any idea how to solve this problem. That's not going to work either. So somehow you have to essentially align all three together. Unless we can do all three together, it's not going to work. So this is what the challenge is. So essentially what in engineering diplomacy, what we are saying that if these are not aligned, at least be aware that your brilliant solution will have no credibility. So the solutions will only be applicable if somehow we can engineer the system in a way that all three are aligned. So you have to convince the politicians, look, this may be in your best interest because next year you are not going to go and win the election. So the politician will have an interest in that problem also. You may have an interest as an academic, look, I know the problem and I know how to solve it. And that's an engineering solution, that's no problem, but that's not going to cut it. So now to bring it to real ground, so I want to give you some example really that I am familiar with. So from Bangladesh has been doing this water resource project for last 50 years. It made independent in 1971, so it's about 50 years. In 50 years there were hundreds of projects were funded from all kinds of places, from World Bank to DFID, USAID, you name it. And these are some of the color that shows the different projects, and not important the details. But what I want to see, this is a paper that was published recently to look at these 800 projects. There are over 800 water development projects, and they have done all kinds of things, and it has significantly improved irrigation, it has significantly improved rice production, it has significantly improved basically the infant mortality. So all kinds of things have happened. But if you really also look at clearly, what you see really from the policy to the project level, things get weaker and weaker. At the policy level, things are very good. But at the project level, things do not seem to be very good. So what they have come up with, such reflections gradually weaken as we move from policies to institutions to projects. At the policy level, at the government level, things look very nice. At the institution level also, I think things are looking good at the ministry level. But when you actually go into the ground, you see that not much has been done. And this is not really unique to Bangladesh. I am sure I can give similar example in Lebanon, we have done in Egypt, we have done in Sudan, same problem. So what is going on? So this is what we are fundamentally challenging, that the mindset that we have to solve this problem is really not working. And we need to at least recognize this. And this is really a 50-year story. If you do this, then so this was a book really I liked. This was written I think almost 50 years ago. So development projects observed. So this guy is a brilliant guy, an economist from Harvard, and he looked at about 6 or 7 World Bank projects. A very brilliant guy. From there he synthesized few things about 50 years ago, and these are still true. So it's so good that it's still true. So what did he find? So this is a project that I picked from Bangladesh really. This project was funded about 15 years ago, about $150 million to improve certain water resource project, because water resource in 1958 there was serious flood in Bangladesh. So everybody in the world decided, no, I think we have to help this country. So they did. So they spent a lot of money. They created all kinds of things, from basically trying to create embankments to sluice gate and so on. A very engineered type solution, and in 10 years the rice production doubled. It was very good. So it was hailed as a very good, but there was no maintenance plan. So all these sluice gates and embankment has become totally dysfunctional over time. So World Bank in their basically majesty decided, fine, we will pay $150 million loan to fix this. So they started doing this, and then suddenly a big cyclone hit. Government decided that the money needed somewhere else. So part of the money went to cyclone shelters. So then again, after the cyclone, then they brought the money back. So already $50 million spent somewhere else. Over 15 years now, they have written their final report in 2017. So one of my students were the task leaders. So I looked at the World Bank report. It was considered one of the best projects that they have done. And now if you really look and go back to their original conceptualization of the project, what they wanted to do and what they have actually done, there is no relationships. Although they are considered to be a successful project. I say, what is this? They say, no, World Bank doesn't care really what is being done. Their job is to essentially give money and get it back. As long as that is done, it's successful. What you have done with that money is none of their business, it's a bank. So that's what they disconnected, and it's not unreal. This is what it is. So as a result, what this guy found, he said that any complex projects really has 2 sets of evolutionary path. That's what Hirschman found. He said that there will be unexpected threats. When this project was conceived, they did not know that there will be cyclone and the government will divert the money, but it did happen. When that happens, really, what do you do? So what do you do really? Then you know that there will be uncertainty, there will be problem with scale, there will be problem with emergence. Then you try to do a set of unplanned creative actions, meaning that you could not plan what will happen. There is simply no way you can predict really 5 years from now what will happen. These projects are usually 10 to 15, 20 years projects. Most of the large water resource projects are very large scale, long time. So when those unexpected things happen, how do you essentially plan? You cannot plan really. These are unplanned activities. Then you need to be creative really. Those creativity has to be now rooted in things that we can learn. What that means really, so we are in the present, and this is certain. I am here at AUB, unless I am a hallucination, but more or less I think I am physically standing here. But how I came here is really a very much open to subjective interpretation. If you ask my mother, she will have a very different story than my daughter, and my friends will have another story, and I have another story. All of these are true, because who decides to basically emphasize which part of the story, but physically I am here. So even the past is not that clear, how to interpret the past. Then future is totally uncertain, because I have no idea really what will happen on Friday. But I am hoping that I will go back to Boston on Saturday. Who knows, because given the turmoil that is going on in the region, I may not. I have no idea. So the question is that the future is totally unknown. So if the future is unknown, then what do I do really by standing in the present? So I still have to make decisions. So what it essentially then brings us to this point: the complex system is neither sufficiently described by quantum mechanics or by classical physics. These are the 2 things we know. We know classical physics or we know quantum mechanics. That's all basically science has told us, because our understanding of science essentially are limited by 2 things. Either you are in the classical physics domain, that basically from atom to the galaxy, I know Newton's law. If I am at the quantum level, I have to go into Heisenberg uncertainty principles. That's what my understanding is. But that is not really good enough. What we are saying that these two guys, Brittle and Weber, 1973, they wrote a paper. And their paper was so profound, they were so good, they have not even cited anyone. These are two young assistant professors at Berkeley, decided that they will write a paper, and this paper was cited over 10,000 times now. The search for scientific basis for confronting problems of social policy is bound to fail. This is 1973. So they are telling you that, look, don't even worry about it. Don't bother using science objectively to solve societal problems. But we are trying to do this. What we are challenging is water diplomacy. No, I think this is really, let's be clear really. It's not science. Science is not the problem here. Science, policy, politics are interlinked. Unless you understand this lady got it right. She said, no, you can't take politics out of analysis. So what we are hoping to do with our water diplomacy or engineering diplomacy is to try to combine all three. Bring physics, bring policy, bring politics, combine them together and be pragmatic about it with certain principles. If you can do this, then you have something to basically go forward. This is the way World Bank does it, and World Bank is not unique. If you really look about it, this is the way things are usually planned. Almost any project anywhere in the world, it will follow these steps. If you don't follow these steps, you don't get funding. But if you look at this, really, this is also really very naive. There will be uncertainty, there will be things that you cannot plan, but what you are doing that you have a guidance, you have an appraisal, you have review, you have selection, you have implementation, adjustment, operation and evaluation. Very typical, and this is, unless you do this, World Bank is not going to give you money, and they are giving you billions of dollars all over the world. And what I tell my students that, look, don't give billion-dollar projects to developing countries, give $1,000 million projects. It will be much better, because $1 billion with a 20% kickback to bribery is $200 million gone. And it will happen. It's not that basically it's unusual, it's going everywhere. Everywhere in the world, really, the people who make decisions, they will be taking 20% cut. So make it $1,000 million project, they will have less incentive. So these are the few of the projects that Bangladesh has done. We don't need to go to the detail, but what I'm trying to emphasize that basically from 1964 to 2013, many institutions were created. And when they were created with some good intentions, but these were not going to work really unless they are somehow interconnected and they learn by doing stuff. And then these are the actual institutions those were created, from Bangladesh Water Development Board to, say, Ministry of Water Resources, WARPO and so on. And then if you put them together, so WARPO is the one that will coordinate all this water ministry. And this is from Bangladesh. This is not only unique to Bangladesh. If you go to the US, we have 17 different institutions that runs water. 17 different institutions within the same government. And US government is pretty robust then compared to Bangladesh. So what will happen? If you have that many ministries basically with conflicting needs and wants, and then you are trying to organize all these things in one coherent way, simply no way. So that brings us to then all kinds of other problems, that basically who is connected with what, and then what can be done. And then say, okay, now you have come up with another buzz that stakeholder participation is needed. So everywhere, any project that has to be funded, you have to have stakeholder participation. Then you ask, who is the stakeholder really? So I had a student really from biology, he wrote a paper, was very nice, is duck a stakeholder? So of course, a duck is a bird, and then uses water, uses the ecosystem. Is duck a stakeholder? What is the criteria should I use to make someone a stakeholder? Say a few months ago, Bangladesh decided the river is a stakeholder. River is like a person. Fine, very nice. So what is the responsibility of the river? And who is going to be responsible? Unless you have responsibility and accountability, how could you be a stakeholder? So these questions are never asked, but these are imposed, particularly some Western ideas, into Eastern systems. In the West, it can work because in the West, most of the societies are still horizontal. Go to basically many of the developing countries, decision making is hierarchical. So in that hierarchical decision making process, stakeholder participation is just a myth, because it simply will not work, because the person who makes the decision is sitting at the top, is the king. So this is something that I just borrowed from the Bangladesh study. It's a complex and multi-causal problems that cannot be solved through infrastructure solution for community management alone. So what it is trying to tell you that they are understood that the problems are complex, these are multi-causal, that cannot be solved, but they don't really go what to do next. So, what here we are saying that look, ultimately what you do in the future will be always unknown, and that particular path, it cannot be shown here. I think, see, there are many paths you can take, but eventually when you are making decision, you will take only one path. The question is, which path do I take? That should depend really on the capacity and the constraint of the system that you have. So, what we are saying here is that you need to do some adaptive learning. So, you can't jump into the future, you need to go there. So, by the time you have gone there, it is already too late. I just cannot jump into the future. At the same time, past also does not tell me very much. So, what do I do? So, this is almost like, if you think about an analogy, it is almost like thinking about you are driving a car, you only thing you have is the rear view mirror. The rear view mirror is perfectly fine as long as the road is the same. If there is a turn in the road, you will get a serious accident, and there is no way around it. So, that means our whole understanding of science based on previous observations need to be seriously challenged. Yes, we need to learn from the past, but that is not enough, because future is most likely not to be similar to the past. If it is not really, then you do this trial and error, not trial and success. The trial and error, although this is very cliche, that is what it is. So, there is no guaranteed solution really, unless the problems are simple and complicated. If the problems are complex, you have to do trial and error and you will fail. That is perfectly fine, but recover very quickly from failure. If you can do this, then you have these complex adaptive systems that can be contingent, and you learn by doing this. So, that brings us really essentially to our almost final slide is, when you have very close to certain that I know the science perfectly. So, if this is the case, I don't know, this is not okay. So we agree really what the consensus is. So, we are in a simple domain. This is where the Newtonian mechanics will work. So, meaning that most of the things that we have learned in school is in that domain. This is in the domain of simple, basically where I know the physics and everybody agrees that this can be done, is like electricity, building a dam, flushing a toilet. These are simple problems. When problem becomes complex really, then you have less and less certainty about the science, even less and less certainty about the consensus. And most of the problem I am claiming that it belongs here. If it does really, then what you have really, you have complex decision making process here. So, what complex decision making process does really, you are far away from certainty, you are far away from consensus. So, that means there will not be one solution to any problem, there will be many solutions. Then which one to choose has no unique answer, unless it is negotiated within the group that will be affected by this. So, that brings us to here really. So, then you have to decide really what the context is, who will decide really what the problem is, and then is, if you are interested in the development for whom and how. You can use water resource for development. So, if I want to use this for development, then for whom are we doing this development? Is it really to build the army, or is it for enhancing education or poverty alleviation? These are different goals. That has to be decided, and you have to ask really who will decide that really. Once you have done that, then you say really, okay, fine, I need to find out the actual stakeholder. The stakeholder meaning that the people who will be affected, or the system that will be affected by this. So, you will have defined that network by looking at this consensus and uncertainty space. Then you go and diagnose the problem. Then what are the constraints in the system that I have? What constraints do I have, so that I can look at the constraints and find out some options that will work for this. Then you go and implement the solutions, and then you keep doing it in circle, and you can put anything you want. So, I put Bangladesh development plan here, SDG, but you can put almost anything you want here. You can say that, okay, water crisis in South Lebanon could be in that place, but the framework should work. So, this is exactly the framework that we are promoting really from the engineering diplomacy or the principal pragmatic perspective. So, what we claim that it does not really matter what the problem is. The problem definition has to start from here. It has to define really the context is. Once the problem is defined, then you can go through this circular basically routine, then that will allow you to come up with some way to address this problem in a pragmatic way.
And including politics as part of the
Yes, of course. Who decides is the politics. So, is it the prime minister or is it everyone
Not the
else?
science problem or the.
It is not. Science will be the basically once we have decided what the problem is, scientists should come up with the brilliant solution and the optimal solution. Then I claim that look, there are many solutions, those are possible really, but not all solutions are actionable. Ultimately, solutions possible does not mean much. So, I can claim that I can become a musician, and with the interest of full disclosure, I have no music talent. Basically, my daughters and wife, they sing very well, so they tell I have no talent. But if I say that no, I want to do it, perhaps I can do it really if I go and basically enroll in a music school and learn little bit, but I will never be a Bach or Mozart. So, this is a constant I have. So, given that things are possible does not mean these are actionable. Most likely 5 years from now, I will still be doing water. So, the reason that because this is the system level constant and capacity that I have. Given, so the lot of solutions are possible, what is actionable is important. So, given the capacity of the system and the constant of the system, what is actionable? What can I really measure and this show that really I have made some progress. That brings us to this idea of enabling conditions. So, this is another book that we have written, so I will not get into this. So, enabling conditions is different than your causal conditions. Usually, we try to find out cause and effect. So, if I ask you really, does oxygen cause fire? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. The oxygen causes fire, okay. True or not?
Contributes.
Huh?
It contributes to fire.
It contributes. you're careful.
Causes and maintains.
No, see,
or only one?
no, I use a very particular, I said, does oxygen cause fire?
No,
It
it doesn't.
doesn't.
No, by itself it doesn't.
By itself doesn't. See, now you get. So, but now think about it really 3000 years ago when I did not know all of this. So, there are a lot of fire. I am a scientist, so I go and take measurements. So, what do I see? Everywhere there is fire, there is oxygen. So, I write a theory that oxygen causes fire. I will be pretty good because I have basically gone to any place that there is a fire, there is an oxygen and it causes fire. It is a good model. How do I know that it is not a good model now? Now we figured out really no, it does not because oxygen is here, there is no fire. How come? I need a trigger. Unless there is a trigger, it will not be. So, that means oxygen is not a causal factor, it is an enabling condition. And that is very important. So, oxygen does not cause fire, but without oxygen there will be no fire. That is also true. So, that means what we need to know is not cause and effect, which is the fundamental of basically physics. So, we are saying that no, in societal problem, it is not basically cause effect relation, it is the enabling conditions, those are important. What are the enabling conditions that we need? So, I tell my students, look, if you want to have a PhD, there are certain enabling conditions. Number one, you have to be alive. Of course, otherwise you cannot do PhD. You have to have at least one undergraduate degree. It does not matter what degree it is, unless you get an honorary PhD, that is a different story. But if you want to get a PhD, you need to have an undergraduate degree. So, those are enabling conditions. Just because that you are alive, just because that you have undergraduate degree will not mean that you will get PhDs, but those are enabling conditions. Then what you have is what we are calling situational conditions. Then situation has to be there. You have to have an advisor, you have to have a project, you have to have money, you have to have time and all kinds of things. These are situational conditions. So, given enabling condition and situational conditions, then certain things are actionable now. And that is very important to think about. So, we are going away really from this whole idea of cause and effect, but we are focusing primarily on enabling and situational conditions. So, we have done several case studies in a book that we just recently published on this. So, how do we learn really and create actionable knowledge for our water world? So, this is a cartoon that I like. So, ultimately you have information. So, they are like basically taking oxygen from somewhere. So, if you really want to make it a little bit more humorous now, so this is what knowledge is. Rabbits, oops, this is not what I wanted. Just one second here. Yeah, it's fine. So, rabbits eat grass, grass grows on soil, rain falls from clouds, wolves eat rabbits. So, this is essentially you can think of this as knowledge. What is the wisdom? Wisdom is that if I kill all the wolves, the rabbits will eat up all the grass, soil will all wash away. That is the wisdom. See, that wisdom will not simply be gained just because I have knowledge or I have information. This is where the critical stuff is. So when we have to make decisions, really, we have to understand really what can I synthesize really from that knowledge. So data is there. These are big data information. These are information. Most of it is noise. From that information, then you have to go to wisdom, and then you get to some measurable outcome. So that is the progression that we have to follow. If we can do this, then I think we are going somewhere. All right. So that brings us really. Let me see what's going on here. So I'm almost at the end. So this is a story that I will say, and then we'll stop. This is a story from this region from the Middle East. And so there was an old man. He had 3 sons, and he was almost in his deathbed. And he said, look, sons, most likely I'll not be here for too long, and I have some camels, and I want to distribute it to you. And so I am just being fair and societally contextually relevant. So the oldest son will get half, second one will get third, and the third one will get ninth. This is the way I want it to happen, and once I die, please do this and live happily ever after. So they fine, I think it happened. So, and he died, and after a few weeks, then brothers sat down. Let's do the division, because our father told us to do it, and then said there is only 17 camel, and if you divide it in half, it becomes 8.5. How could this be? Then what did he have in his mind? And then one engineering type brother, he said, yeah, let's kill them, and the meat you can just take the meat and make it 8.5. That's not a problem. Then said, no, father cannot be that stupid. He didn't want us to kill the meat and eat. He probably had something else in his mind. But they cannot decide what to do, because 17 cannot be divided by half. So they got stuck. So they found out that there is an old lady, really a wise lady, lives next village. So they went to her. He said, look, I think this is what our father told us, and we figured out that we simply cannot solve it. The woman said, no, this is a complex problem. She understood this is a complex problem. She said, let me sleep over it, and tomorrow morning come, and then I will think about it. So they went home and then came back next morning. The next morning she said, look, I think I thought about it overnight. With my wisdom, I have no clue. I have no idea really what to do, but I have an idea. I have a camel, I will give it to you. So she gave her camel to them. She said, look, you can take it. She said, wow, this is such a nice lady. She didn't even solve the problem. She gave us a camel. So fine, they were going back home, walking back, and suddenly they said, now it became 18. So divided by 9, half is 9. It can be done. So they did it. So half is fine, 9 is done. And then third is 6, and then ninth is 2. One camel is still left. He said, wow, this is done. So this is what we are looking for. What is that 18th camel to solve these complex problems? The 18th camel did not exist. So 18th camel did not exist, but 18th camel created the option to divide this problem in a way that is good for all of them. Peaceful way. So this is all we need. So basically our story is there, where is the 18th camel? So if you can find out the 18th camel.
But at the end of the story, she got her camel back.
They gave it back, give it back.
Yeah.
Give it back. So gave it back, not only gave it back, they also are happy now. But if you really now, I don't want to get into this mathematical problem. This is a mathematically problematic, because it doesn't add up to 1, but that's not the problem here. Because it is not an engineering solution. What I think it is promoting that you do not need to have an engineering solution to the problem. It is the idea that you come up with some creative solutions, those are effective for the context of the problem. That is what it is. So this is the first book that we had really for water diplomacy, and then we have written few other really. So this is the one that we talked about, the whole idea of enabling conditions, institutional conditions. So latest one I think we just published is with this idea of principal pragmatic approach, is with about 27 PhDs that graduated from our program. So the idea that we promoted here is that there is no general solution to these problems. solutions are always problem specific. So you have to first identify the problem and then figure out really what are the solution pathway given the capacity and the constraint of the system that you have. That is the bottom line. Okay, I think that was. So I'll just stop here. What is the 18th camel? So this is the question that will remain really hanging on your head for next few months or years to come. Thank you.
Any questions?
It's a new land for us. I never thought about.
That's good. I'm glad that at least you found something to think about. This is, it's not that we are trying to solve the problem. I don't think the problem can be solved, problem can be resolved. But for even resolving the problem, what we need really is a particularly different way of thinking about the problem. It's not really this cause-effect relationship. That's where I think we got stuck. Because, and part of it is essentially is that that's the way we're trained. So we know certain things, so we want to keep doing those things over and over again, because otherwise who would believe you? So what do you know? So there is a career problem here also, because once we develop certain level of expertise, it's very difficult to give it up, because you lose credibility. So it has to be built on an incremental way where you can at least synthesize a lot of things. So that's the reason I don't think I believe in evolution, but it is an evolution. So you have to go through evolutionary process really where you can bring your own expertise and try to use it in a way that is effective. Please.
Thank you. This is really interesting. So how does this line up with scenario planning? Because I mean, I'm a planner, I do a lot of this stuff, I'm very familiar with what you talk about. So that's one question I have for you. The second one, when you put the, when you started with the final framework that you put in, you talk, in all of this we talk about uncertainty, and that's uncertainty in the future. And I don't see the temporal dimension included in what you are talking about. For me, it still feels like this is one point in time that you're providing a solution, while when you're talking uncertainty and different possible linearities or different possible solutions, these are sometime in the future, time-wise. So how does this factor into all of this?
Good point. And there is no unique concept of this. So I'll give you basically a just general overview. So for example, scenario planning. Scenario planning, you can think of it really is also an infinite dimensional space. Why do I say that? So this, I bring out this RGB. So how many scenarios are you going to plan? There is simply, you cannot do 16 million scenarios, because I am telling you with even with three options, I can create 16 million scenarios. And why is your scenario any better than mine? It's not. So, but at the same time, I don't have other options. So in what sense scenario planning could be useful? Scenario planning could be very useful in my mind, is that you want to at least somehow conceptualize two ends of the spectrum. So you look at the worst case scenarios and the best case scenarios. And then you say that fine, if these two are the possibilities, then which one as a group will decide. So tomorrow we'll have another panel. So I have some slide that I'll show you, where I want to basically say that even with three people, so this guy, his name is Kenneth Arrow. Kenneth Arrow is an economist. So his PhD thesis got a Nobel Prize. He's a brilliant guy. So what he showed really in 1960s, that when you have more than three choices, there is simply no way you can get any objective solution, period. Theoretically, he has shown this. So that means scenario planning will not work, in the sense that to get certain solution with certainty, no, you cannot get it, but you will get possible solutions, you will get scenarios.
You're not talking about certainty here anyway, in any case.
No problem. So that is fine. Then it's perfectly fine, and it fits in very well. You look at the worst case and the best case, and then you come up with no regret solutions.
But if you look at the process that you've talked about, the identification of problems and contextualization and all of that, the basic facts, let's say, but then the scenario planning comes in. It's not only just the worst and the best scenarios, it's also about political agendas as well, as you were mentioning.
Sure.
And it's very much inherent in that. So at the end of the day, it's the assumptions that you put in and the agendas that you put in that define in many ways. I think we're saying the same thing. So
Yes. Yeah, and I don't think you'll get around it. And which solution or which agenda will come to the stop is essentially a totally uncertain situation. You will have no idea. If you think about really in any given system really how a particular things just pop up. Like look at what is happening with climate change. Is suddenly a young girl really has revolutionized the whole country, whole world. So how does that happen? And can that be replicated? No, it simply cannot be done. And if you look at, for example, what happened, I think was it in Yemen basically where this guy put himself in fire, and then that started the whole basically Arab Spring and everything else. Tunis. So same story. Can that be replicated? No. After that, many people died by doing same activity, did not do anything. So how these things are triggered, but what we are claiming here is that you need enabling conditions. Enabling conditions are needed unless you, so let me, how much time do we have? Okay, so let me, so in water we have come up with 3. So I want to basically maybe throw it to you, see really whether you can poke some holes into this. What we are claiming that for any water problem, so we were making some big claims here. So any water problem, if it is in a conflict, to resolve this I need 3 enabling conditions. Number 1 is that there has to be a mutual recognition of interdependencies. 2 parties must recognize that they are interdependent publicly. So example is, for example, if you look at the Nile, if you look at, for example, Egypt for last several years did not even bother to talk. Now that Ethiopia started building the dam, so they are talking. So now you have that. So basically you have these enabling conditions where there is a mutual recognition. So now they are coming to the table. Whether it will happen or not, we do not know, but at least one thing that has happened, that one is said. Second one is that can I create options that do not exist right now? So that is my 18th camel. Meaning that right now, okay, Egypt wants water really, that is basically was given by British in 1929 for the Nile. Now Ethiopia said that who is British? Water is basically originated in Ethiopia. Why do basically Egypt should have water? Egypt said no, this is international protocol, and water flows through us, it belongs to us. So now it's a problem. So and they are stuck, and they are fighting over this fixed amount of water, and fixed amount of water is about 78 billion cubic meter. If you look at the actual water in the Nile, it's 2000 billion cubic meter, 2000, and we are only fighting about 78. How come? So by just simply doing some efficient irrigation, I can double it. So why not invest money there and then take it differently? Ethiopia is building a big dam, it will create hundreds of kilowatts of energy, they do not know how to use it. Sell it at a cheaper price to Egypt. Ask them that basically you buy our electricity, we will give you water. So these are the mutual gain options that we have to create. Those are equally acceptable to both parties. So this is our second condition, that enabling condition. Third one is that you have to anticipate things that will happen in the future that you do not know. So what will be the example? Example will be like Indus Treaty. Indus Treaty was signed in 1960. At that time, they decided that if there is a technical discrepancy between India and Pakistan, who will basically be the arbitrator? You know what the arbitrator was? 1960 they wrote down MIT president. MIT president. MIT president should become the technical arbitrator. Why? Because they thought MIT is a technical institution, he will have, or he or she will have no interest really in those 2 countries, so will be an independent body. And it came in 2016, that was done. In 2016 they could not agree, so MIT president has to appoint a technical committee to decide really how to resolve this technical problem. But they have anticipated that problem in 1960. So those are the 3 things we said that these are the enabling conditions you need. Once you have those enabling conditions, then situational condition will change. So now for the Nile, what is the situational condition? The condition is that how to fill the dam. It's not a big problem. Unless Ethiopia decides to fill the dam in 1 year, then Egypt will have no water. But if they fill it over 10 years, no problem. There is simply no problem. This is not a technical problem. This is a political problem. So that political problem has to be resolved now. And the way to do this, at least you create those 3 enabling conditions, then work with the situational condition. If that cannot be done, it cannot be done, simply. All right.
Very interesting.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.